of the most nerve-wracking things about law school can be cold calls, where your professor just randomly calls on people and grills you with a bunch of questions about the material. So in this video, I'm going to give you some tips for how to handle being on cold calls. The first thing to keep in mind is to prepare adequately and properly for class. At the beginning of the semester, you may have to spend a little additional time preparing for class because you're not quite sure what your professor is going to ask about or how they're going to handle cold calls. But as you start to see the types of questions that your professor likes to ask of students who are being cold called, you can keep that in mind as you prepare for class. So for instance, if your professor likes to take the time to focus on the facts of the case, then you should take some extra time when you're reading to go over the facts and make sure you understand what's happening. On the other hand, if your professor dives right into the holding of a case, don't worry about the facts. You don't have to spend as much time preparing those because your professor clearly doesn't provide or put as much importance on them. One great way of preparing for class efficiently is book briefing. Book briefing is where you use a different color highlighter for the different pieces of the brief that you would have for the case. So rather than writing out the facts of the case, the rule of the case, the holding of the case, you can have different colored highlighters where you highlight the facts in one color, the rule in a color, the holding in a color, maybe their analysis in a color, and take notes in the different colors. That way, if your professor calls on you and says, what was the rule that the court applied? You can quickly go to your color that you use for rules and identify exactly what the rule is that you should be referring to. Your professor probably isn't expecting you to have memorized all of the readings that you did for that class, so it is perfectly acceptable to refer back to your notes and the book when you're on cold call. So having this book briefing done is a great way to keep everything organized and quickly turn exactly what you need in the event that you get called on. Also, try not to do the reading too far in advance. Some people like to get all the reading for the week done over the weekend so that they don't have to worry about reading during the week. But let's say you get called on Thursday. It's a good chance that if you did the reading over the weekend, it's not going to be as fresh, it's not going to stick with you all the way through to Thursday, particularly if you did all of your reading over the weekend. So instead of reading in advance, try to read as close to class as possible. So do your reading the night before or even the morning of class. That way you only have to read it once and you don't have to go back and review what you already read in preparation for being called on. When you're called on in class, be prepared to not know the answer, and it's okay if you don't know the answer. The point of cold calls is to push your limits and your understanding of the material. So even if you think you know the answer to a particular question, professors might push it. They might give you hypotheticals. They might test your understanding, twist the facts, and give you new questions that really push your understanding of the material. They're trying to get you to say, I don't know the answer. They're trying to push the limits of your understanding. So keep in mind that you might not always know the answer, and that's okay. Also keep in mind that cold calls likely don't affect your grade. If they do, it's probably not by very much. Sometimes the professor will give a slight bump for your performance in cold calls. It could be, let's say, 10% of your grade for participation. But the vast majority of your grade comes from your exam. So if it's not really worth much to your grade as far as being cold called, it's not really worth getting too worked up about. You don't want to come completely unprepared, but keep that in mind. If you feel like you maybe didn't answer a question perfectly, at the end of the day, it's likely not going to affect your grade. When you're on cold call, be confident, speak up, answer the questions like you know exactly what you're talking about, even if you're not sure. At the very least, you get a great chance to practice your public speaking skills. Think about the answers and being creative. Make good arguments that a lawyer should make. This is a great opportunity to practice your arguing skills as well. Don't worry about what your classmates think about your answers. There's a very good chance that no one is going to remember what you said as soon as class is over. Answer it confidently and use this as a great opportunity to practice public speaking. If you're nervous, try to channel that nervousness into excitement. Get excited about being on call. Look at it as a great opportunity to practice public speaking. And if you are concerned about things like saying or shrugging or kind of mannerisms like that that could be distracting, practice just being silent. You don't have to fill every moment with words. You can take a minute or two to be silent and think about your answer and collect your thoughts, and that's okay. Hopefully you find these tips helpful and don't stress out too much about being on cold calling class.